IV animal. We were just hoping that we would get the animals to grow at all. I had no grandiose ideas that they were going to grow just as well as the oral ones. I just hoped they would grow. And I just wanted to see how much less they were going to grow by feeding them oral. And to my delight, they grew the same or better. And that was a wonderful feeling for me that at least I was allowing them to achieve their potential. And they were active, the same. They jumped around in the cages and they could spin around. And the only thing I couldn't do was lie on their back because of the swivel apparatus. As I said, we originally made a swivel apparatus out of pieces and junk in Harry Vars's laboratory. Harry was the biochemist that I worked with. The Department of Surgery was lucky to have him. He was our own biochemist. He had been a senior professor of biochemistry in the biochemistry department, and then in his retirement years, he joined the Department of Surgery, and we abused him. You know, guys like me and Wilmore and Steiger, we just drained his head. He was a fount of knowledge. Whatever I asked about nutrition or metabolism or biochemistry, Harry Vars either had the answer or he knew where to get it in the library. And he'd go off, and then about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd return to his office. He'd have a stack of reprints that he made copies of with the librarian, Francis Houston. There were so many people, you know, that kind of helped us. And if we had any questions, we'd go to pathology, and they would give us suggestions and ideas about tissue and about, including blood tissue. Blood's a tissue. And so we had, I was never bashful about asking for help. Never did I ever think I knew it all, still don't. And I'll ask for it. I have absolutely no pride. I'll ask a favor or knowledge from anybody I think can help me. And I'm not embarrassed about it. I'll say, look, I'm just dumb. I'm sorry, I'm dumb. I don't know. Will you help me? And it's amazing if you have a little humility and you go out there with your hands like this, they want to help you. You can't be arrogant or snotty or surgical, if I may use that bad term. Some surgeons come on, they think they're gods, and that hurts them and their patients. But at any rate, I don't want to get into that. But it did impede us for a while, that attitude. And once I showed Dr. Rhodes on the 24th day that these puppies were growing, the mongrels, he said, and Stanley, what peripheral vein are you using? And I thought, uh-oh, because he told me that American medicine would never accept central venous feeding. He said the central vein is verboten. Don't ever go there. They'd call it the alligator pit. Don't get into the alligator pit. You'll get devoured. And so I knew I had no choice but to go into the alligator pit. And so that's what we did. And I said, well, we're using the external jugular vein. And he said, yes, Stanley, that's where you're putting the catheter in, but where is the tip of it? So, you know, I tried to con him, but I couldn't. He was too smart for me. And he said, where is the tip? I said, well, it's in the middle of the superior vena cava. He said, so you're really feeding them by central vein? I said, yes, sir. And I thought those were going to be my last words to him. I figured I was history. I was going to be fired because that was a direct violation of what he told me. He said, do not use the central vein. It will not be accepted. And, but in desperation, you do desperate things. And I knew he was a kind man, and I knew that if he gave me a chance to rationally explain what I was doing and why, that he'd give me my time in court, which he did. And he said, well, I guess you can't beat success. And I said, sir, is that an endorsement of what I'm doing? He said, well, you can go ahead and buy those beagle puppies you want to buy, and I'll pay for them, and I'll support. So he was letting me know he may not have agreed with everything I was doing 100%, but he agreed to support what I wanted to do. And and that was the only time, by the way, he ever spent in the lab. So a lot of people talk about Dr. Rhodes. His contributions were from the top of Mount Olympus, you know. It's like talking about George Marshall during the Second World War, who was in the Pentagon, you know, and Eisenhower was the head of NATO, but who won the war, you know? Those kids charging the beaches and getting slaughtered, and so, and yet you can't do it without people like Eisenhower or Marshall, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without a kind, generous, trusting mentor like Jonathan Rhodes, and he probably trusted me more than any human being, and said so. And
was he a nice man?
Oh yeah, he was a classic Quaker. He had 2 black suits, 2 black pair of shoes. That's all his closet had. A couple white shirts and a couple pen ties, and that you know, he was just, and he was about 6'6". By the time he died, he was shorter than I. You know, his vertebrae kind of collapsed. But I remember shortly before he died, standing next to him, we were the same height. And I remembered when I had to do this to see him. And, and he had that quiet sense of knowledge, wisdom, and power that you just knew that this man could rule the world and you'd be happy. Because it would be fair and honest and as good as it could be. And that's how I felt about him. And
Dr. Dudrick, could you tell us about Dr. Wilmore? He was your contemporary, right?
Yeah, Wilmore was a couple of years, 2 or 3 years behind me in the residency. And I talked him into coming into the lab because I told him this would be an opportunity for him. He had no interest in it, but I did talk him into it. So near the end of our experiment, he had nothing to do with the original puppies. That was all done before he came to us. And he actually came to us about the time we got the baby. Because he joined us July 1 and I started treating the baby in August of that year. And Wilmore lived about a block from Children's Hospital. So I asked him if he would stop in and, you know, see the baby once or twice a day, like in the morning before he came to work and at night before he went to bed, and then I would see the baby several times during the day. And so he was unique in the sense that he was the only resident who chose another resident as his mentor. So I was the only resident at Penn that ever had residents in the NIH leadership, scientific, academic group. And I was kind of flattered. And I remember Dr. Rhodes saying, well, Doug, you realize that Stan is not really a member of the faculty, that he's a resident. And he said, yes, sir, I realize that. He said, well, I just wanted to remind you, you know, he might not be able to help you as much as one of the senior faculty. And Wilmore said, I'm not looking for help. I'm looking to help Dr. Dudrick. And so it started off as a very nice partnership that we worked on, and I rewarded him. You'll notice that on the baby paper, I put his name first. Now, by all criteria, his name did not belong first. But what a stimulus it was to him. And that was my project, every inch of it. But around the world, there are people that think he did it, and I helped him. but it was the opposite. But it doesn't matter. I don't care.
First name doesn't mean anything. The smartest people put their name at the end.
I can't hear you.
The professors who are leading the program usually put their names at the end.
Yeah, so it was just Wilmore and Dudrick, so I thought, well, people will know it was done in my lab, and they knew that I did all the preliminary work with the animals, and I thought, why not let Doug be first author? But he didn't write a single word of that paper. At that time, he had a hard time spelling. I had to teach Doug how to spell. Here's this brilliant guy, he really was bright. He didn't know how to spell, he didn't know how to write, he couldn't put 4 words together and make a phrase out of it. I really had to sit with him and mentor him, but he was a quick study, and he did a great job of it. And then he made a tragic mistake. And it's one that it wasn't all his fault. When we did the baby, the head of that department of surgery was, of course, Chick Coop, the guy who became the Surgeon General. And then under him was a man named Harry Bishop. Harry Bishop did not want me to feed that baby. He said no to the research fellows or to the pediatric fellows. He said, no, she has no hope. Just let her die. Then August 1st, he went to Europe for a month's vacation. And he wasn't probably on the plane when those guys called me and said, Stan, we need you to come to Children's Hospital right away. And I went down to see what they wanted, and I gave them a talk like this about the puppies, and they said, well, we have a baby we'd like you to look at. And so I did take a look at it, and I said, I think that baby is about as ideal a candidate to try to duplicate the puppy work as I can imagine. Because we can really not do much harm if the family and the caregivers agree. We know that we're probably not gonna make it. She'll probably die or we'll kill her, but she was gonna die anyway. And at least she died with us trying. So that was my philosophy. I'd rather have them die while I'm trying to help them than to just say, go home and die. That's cruelty. Well, that's what Harry thought, and he didn't know any better. And these 2 young whippersnappers, one of them was an intern mate of mine, and before he went to pediatric surgery, and I gave a talk to the entire staff at Children's Hospital, filled up the auditorium. There were a couple hundred people there. And I told them all the good things and all the bad things that could happen if I did that baby. And I said, I can't come here and try to do that baby unless you all buy into it. I said, I cannot be a foreigner in your midst. And I said, I'm not Jesus in the temple, but and I can't do that. I need support. I need you all 24/7. And I'm not sure even that will do it. And I said, if people don't agree with what we're doing, I hope that they will excuse themselves from the care of the baby, because we need all the help we can get. We don't need any distractors. We don't need to be sabotaged. And I was right in their faces about it up front, and I had strong support from Dr. Coop, and we became close friends. And he understood what we were trying to do, and so there was no IRB at that time, no Institutional Review Board. That was pre-IRB times. Mm-hmm. So I used the entire hospital staff as an IRB. Mm-hmm. I wanted all of them to buy in, and we wanted everybody. I spent the whole day there, 8 hours in that auditorium, listening to everything that they wanted to say or do. And then the next day, they all said, we want you to do it. Is that me? No, it can't be. I went down and took some pictures, and I talked to the engineering people there about making a kind of a special support for the baby, like a hammock with a stainless steel bottom to collect urine and stool if there was any. And is that me? Somebody has a. Well, if it's not bothering you, I can put up with it. Okay, I then, is that you, Teresa? Shame on you. Shame on you. Okay, all right.
Could you tell us more
So-
about the baby?
What?
About the baby and baby's family.
Yeah, well, the baby had what they call a Christmas tree mesentery. She had one artery that came just along the mesenteric border of the bowel. There was no arcades, you know. Usually the mesentery is full of all kind of crisscrossing and alternate ways, but this is one artery, like the femoral artery going down your leg with some side branches. And what happened is the bowel twisted around that artery, and the artery got choked off, and the bowel died. So when they operate on a baby, they took out a newborn baby has maybe 200 centimeters of small bowel. They can have as much as 300, but 200 to 300. And she had about 200, and they cut it all out from the duodenum, plus they left in 2 centimeters of terminal ileum. And she also had a stricture in her colon that they cut out. And they just felt that she had an impossible situation. And she was 6.5 pounds when she was born, and she lost weight to 4 pounds when I got to see her. And she was dying. Her eyes, she had a hard time opening her eyes, and she was limp, and well, it was pathetic. She was dying, and I went in, and we wouldn't dare put her to sleep to put a catheter in. The anesthesiologist said she probably would die from the anesthetic. So I just, put some Novocaine in her neck, and I made a little cut down, and she didn't seem to mind, and put a catheter through her jugular, threaded it down into the superior vena cava. And then, as I did in the puppies, I took the other end of the catheter and ran it up behind her ear, and I brought it out near the top of her head to give it a subcutaneous tunnel that I thought would make it less likely to get infected, and to get it away from her hand and from her, mucus coming out of her mouth and her nose. And we thought of a lot of other reasons we did it after we did it, but some of them were before. And it ended up being kind of the standard for a while. And we began to feed her that day. I gave her, the first thing I did was double the sugar and some of the electrolytes, and gave her a few more vitamins than she was getting. And that's all I did, because I didn't want to just give her a TPN solution right from the start. If she reacted poorly, I wouldn't have any idea what it was. So I thought I better do this in steps, so that if she reacted poorly to any one of those steps, it would give me some idea what might be causing the trouble. And we incrementally increased the composition in quantity and quality, and she just thrived. I mean, within 24 to 48 hours, she acted like a plant that was drying out, and you gave it some water, and all of a sudden the leaves, spring up, and people were amazed. They just thought it was magic. And I said, it's just energy and substrate, and but it is an amazing thing to see. And she just kept getting better, and then after 45 days, the catheter was starting to deteriorate, because it wasn't, you know, it was a catheter that I made from tubing I bought at Nanny Mo and Jack's, the Pep Boys. There was no medical grade catheter. I got it from a big roll. It was tubing that they used for fuel injection in automobiles, and but the thing about it was non-reactive, because we tested it in different animals. It didn't cause inflammation in the fat or skin or vein, and you could autoclave it, which was a big bonus. You couldn't autoclave any of the other plastic catheters; they would melt. So we were lucky, but that's and I had tried 18 other catheters, 16 of which were called medical grade, but not one of them could you call medical grade today. But they were medical grade for their time, but they weren't using them the way we were using them. So the catheter started to deteriorate, and I was afraid it might break and embolize. So at 45 days, we got her weighed and took a whole bunch of studies, pulled the catheter out, and put another one in. And in those 45 days, which was 6 weeks or more, she gained weight from 4 to 6.5 pounds, back to where she had started after she was born. And her head circumference increased a couple centimeters, her chest circumference 3 or 4 centimeters. She increased in length. All of the indices or parameters that the pediatricians measure, she was normal, and her metabolism was good, and so we were delighted. And then we then wrote her up, and the reason we wrote her up as a case study was Dr. Koop and Dr. Rhodes thought that this was too important to try to do a series or to try to do more. They said, you've proven your point. 6 weeks by vein. Nobody's ever done that before in history. Get it out there so other people can validate it or try it, improve it, or say it's a bunch of baloney, whatever happens. So we not only published it, but published in the AMA journal. And we chose the AMA journal because it had the largest circulation of any journal in the country at that time, probably in the world. And we did that, but I'll get you in a second. We did that. Dr. Rhodes actually called the editor of the journal. He knew him. And he said, I want to ask you a favor. He said, I want you to look at this yourself. You're the editor. I want you to look at this paper. He said, I think it's a phenomenal addition to the literature. And he says, I think it's a groundbreaking demonstration. And the editor read it and called him back and he said, Jonathan, you're absolutely right. He said, I'm putting it on a fast track. 3 weeks later, it was published. So a month from the time we finished writing it, it was published. And
Remind us, what year was it?
1968. Changed my life forever.
Yeah, what was the...
My life's never been the same since.
Tell about the first time you presented
I'm sorry?
Can you tell the story when you presented in the surgical audience, the growth of the puppies, the response you got when you made the first scientific presentation on the topic?
Sure. This young lady, can I just
Yeah.
you had your hand up?
First of all, thank you very much.
You have to speak up.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
And second of all, my question was the same as this woman's. It was, what year was it published? That was
Yeah, it was 1968. I think it was March or April, I think, of '68, and then in July of that year, we had already turned in a lengthy paper on the puppies,
Yeah.
and that was presented at the Society of University Surgeons, and but of course it takes almost a year from the time you turn that in until it gets published. So in the interval between when we presented it and when it got published, even though it was submitted before the baby paper came out first because of that special situation. And that was good because it was incredible the number of pediatric surgeons that called me from all over the country and the world wanting to come and learn how to do this and see the baby if they could. And again, I thought it was pretty interesting that the first three were from Harvard, Hopkins, and Yale. So it's interesting, you know, the big three of the big three, that's why they're the big three. They leaped on it right away. They could see the potential. And their people came, and every one of those people became an expert in TPN in the world and brought it to their universities and did well. And it was a favor to me because there's nothing better for a scientist than to have other recognized scientists validate your experiment. Once it's validated, then you can say, hey, if you don't believe me, go to Bob Filler, you know, or go to Alex Haller down at Hopkins, you know, or wherever. And so that was very helpful. Now, when I presented the paper, it was at the Sheraton, is that right? In New York, on top of the Pennsylvania Railroad station. And it was at the Society of University Surgeons. And when I got up there, I gave the last paper before lunch. And it really, it caused quite a stir. There were, you know, all kind of, people just couldn't contain themselves. They were talking to each other, and can you believe that? And I'm trying to give the paper, and they're kind of, I had to be careful not to be distracted by all of this activity. And right as I ended the paper, right as I was given the summary, this great big burly guy comes barreling down the central aisle. He must have been about 280 pounds and 6.5 feet tall. And he was a Harvard trained surgeon at Brigham, but he was at Buffalo. John Border. He was a biophysicist, a biochemist, an MD, a surgeon, and a great guy. And as he was walking down the aisle, I thought, oh my God, he's gonna crush me to death. And I thought, here it comes. And he comes stomping up the stairs to the podium, and he smiled at me, and he got to the microphone. He said, Dr. Dudrick, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you've done. He said, I've been saying for years that this could be done, but I couldn't do it, and nobody else thought it could be done. And I've been trying hard, and now that you've done it, I don't have to work so hard anymore. and now I can just help you take it to the next step. And he just gave this beautiful summation of it. Is you know, I couldn't have paid him to do it better. And then some other people came up and said some things, and some, you know, nobody was mean, but some of them, you know, they always have to pick on something. But it didn't matter to me. I was riding high from the way it was accepted. And John invited me to lunch. He said, "Can I take you to lunch?" And so I missed half of the afternoon program having lunch with him, and we just, you know, were sharing ideas. We became friends for a dozen years or more, and that's how we got our place in New Hampshire. He introduced me to New Hampshire, and at any rate, I just, as I said, both the AMA paper and then that presentation at the university surgeons, there were more reprints of that paper from the university surgeons than any scientific article ever published in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of reprints. They had to keep reprinting the reprints to satisfy the demand. But see, now we don't use reprints anymore. It's all IT. Yeah.
Doctor, whatever happened to the baby?
The baby, great question. The baby ended up we fed the baby for 22 months. She was a month old. We fed her when we got her. We fed her for 22 months. And then the last month of her life, we fed her by standard IV feeding and whatever she could eat, because that's what an ethics committee at Children's Hospital thought should be done. They couldn't see home TPN. I said, well, we can take her, we can prepare her for home. And they said, oh, that's ridiculous. You can't home TPN? You can't take something as complicated as TPN and send somebody home with it? I said, yes, you can. I said, a family will take better care of their kinfolk than nurses and doctors will in the hospital. I said, that's a known fact. And I can teach those families how to do it well, and we'll help them. No, we can't do that, And so I was excluded from any further discussions. And this anonymous committee made the decision that the ethical thing to do is to return the baby to what would be the standard of care prior to me putting the TPN catheter in. And in a funny kind of way, it satisfied Koch's postulates, you know. The baby was dying with standard of care. We revived her and she was growing and developing with the new technique. And when they put her back on standard of care, she regressed and died. And that actually made my experiment stronger but sadder. And that baby didn't have to die. And it still eats at me. I have not come to grips with that. I have not found peace. Middle of the night, I wake up sometime thinking about that baby and seeing her face, but I had no say, and not only that, that committee convinced the family that that was the right thing to do. And I was more sad about that. I was more disappointed that they would take a committee people they never knew and listen to them rather than listen to the guy who spent 24 hours a day for 23 months trying to save their child. And I had they listened to the other way. Of course, that was the easier way out. Maybe they were tired of it. I don't know. I'll never know. And I don't want to know. It's better to leave it go. And that baby did more for pediatric nutrition in her 23 and a half or 2 years of life than hundreds or thousands of babies, since or before then. So I thought that she made her contribution. And I'm very grateful to her, and I try to let people know that we do owe a lot to her, but things come and go. A sad thing, when they built the new children's hospital in Philadelphia, because it used to be downtown 4 miles away from Penn, they built it right next to Penn Hospital, and it's a magnificent place. They had this open lobby, like a Hyatt Regency lobby, big open lobby. It's now been closed in to use the space better, but they put a plaque up naming that lobby after her and her family in their honor.
What was her name?
What?
What was her name?
Kelleen Burgess, Kelleen, Burgess, Burgess. Well, on my 50th anniversary of graduating from Penn, which was 2011, yeah, is that right? Yeah, 2011. We went back for my reunion, and so I went to the Children's Hospital to be in her lobby and to see the plaque, and there was no plaque. There was no name. I went to the front desk and asked about the lobby and the name of the lobby, and they had another name on it. And they had it in big foot-long letters going along, you know, carved in granite. And it was some people gave $1 million to renovate the lobby, and they put their name on it. And Kelleen's, they didn't even have the decency to put a plaque someplace saying that it was originally the Burgess Library and the historical significance of that baby and family. We couldn't even find the plaque. I had security looking for it, I had the administration looking for it. All of it had changed, so there was nobody left there who ever heard of her or knew her or gave a damn, for that matter. So how quickly people forget. But it's a good lesson, and I teach my students that. I said, don't ever, ever do anything for a patient to get gratitude from them. That's not why you became a physician. You became a physician to serve your patients, not to have them pay you or tell you how wonderful you are or hug you or whatever. Don't expect gratitude. That's the wrong reason. And I use that example. I said, can you imagine the ingratitude, not of the patient, but of the whole system, to take away from that baby her major contribution? I said, they had no concept what that baby contributed to the advancement of nutrition of pediatric patients. I'm hoping that before I die, I'll be able to talk to somebody down there and shame them into correcting their error. Say, you guys screwed up. And you're actually hurting yourself because you're denying your contribution to history. You know, you started it all down here at Children's Hospital. You had the guts to back me up as a nobody in medicine, and we were successful, and now you threw it away. But at any rate, people are people.
Doctor, I think we all agree that this is one of the most wonderful talks I've ever heard, but our time is almost up.
Okay.
We have other breakout sessions that start at 4
Okay.
o'clock, so you might want to take a question or two.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
After this first baby, how long was it and where was it before you had number two?
Before I had what?
Before number two baby.
Before number two, we got number two baby maybe within about 6 weeks.
Oh.
We had, and by the time that baby died, I had done 18 other babies there that had gastroschisis or ruptured omphalocele. And that's a great question, thank you. The interesting thing about that is the mortality rate for taking care of those kinds of babies where the bowel the baby's born with the bowel outside the belly. Not only that, you can't put it all back into the belly because the belly cavity constricts without having a bowel in there to keep it open. And so it's a surgical and nutritional challenge. At any rate, the mortality rate for the babies at Children's Hospital born with that was 86%. So that only 14 or one out of 7 would make it. And we did 18 in a row, and they all lived and left the hospital. That got people's attention. And so from the critics who said, well, big deal, Dudrick, you did this impossible baby, so what? You know, what about, how many of them are you gonna get? I said, well, she was the worst, and we did that so that we could do no harm, or do the minimum harm. And now the other babies who weren't quite as bad as she have benefited from it.
Yeah.
So it just changed the way pediatric surgery is done. It revolutionized pediatric surgery.
And were they all at CHOP
CHOP, yeah.
as well? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, they were all at CHOP. Yeah.
When did it become where people went home, everybody was using TPN, or did it used to be called hyperalimentation?
Yeah, well, that was another thing. You know, people got. It's interesting when people don't have anything to contribute, they contribute criticism, or they contribute names and all that. Now, the hyperalimentation was Dr. Rhodes's fault. There was a man at Columbia by the name of Tui, C-O, capital T-U-I, who coined the term hyperalimentation to take care of cancer patients at Memorial Hospital and at Cornell. And he had the idea that if you could force feed cancer patients by tube or however, combination of tube and by vein, that you would help them overcome the cancer or live longer. Well, it didn't work as well as he thought because he just didn't have the technology. And but he called it hyperalimentation. And of course they poo-pooed him and he kind of faded away. But he was a colleague of Dr. Tom Randall, for whom Miriam had worked at Rhode Island. And Tom was a great guy like Dr. Rhodes. They were similar. They're both big, gentle, kind, good people. And Tom had more of an interest in enteral. Dr. Rhodes had more of an interest in parenteral. And they kind of complemented each other. We worked together with them from a distance. But one day Dr. Rhodes said, well, I said, well, Dr. Rhodes, I said, in the first paper I wrote, I called it total parenteral nutrition. And I said, I thought a lot about it. I thought about parenteral nutrition, but it's not just parenteral nutrition. There are articles all over the literature called parenteral nutrition, and that's sugar water, salt water. I said, how do we differentiate what we do from parenteral nutrition? I still don't like the idea that we call it PN now. I think it's a misnomer. It is parenteral nutrition, but it's not TPN. Parenteral nutrition is anything that you give parenterally. TPN is very well identified. Now maybe it's not the ideal term, but to use them interchangeably is not correct. But I just work here. At any rate, to end that, he said, so what we're doing is parenteral hyperalimentation. And I said, well, I don't know, Dr. Rhodes. I said, I'm not sure I like the word because it gives you the impression you're overfeeding. When you say hyper, they're going to say, are you overfeeding? And if we say we're overfeeding, we're going to get into trouble. He said, oh, well, he said, what we can say is we're giving more feeding than you could give by standard. So he said, you'll have to just explain it to them. And he liked it. And so it went from parenteral hyperalimentation to intravenous hyperalimentation. And I took a lot of heat for that. People would argue about the etymology of the words and all kind of crazy stuff. So I liked TPN, but you could make a verb out of hyperalimentation. You could say we hyperalimented them. It's hard to say we totally parenterally nourish them. Your tongue all mixed up. At any rate, someday they'll come up with, or they'll replace it with something better. But I try not to get into those arguments where they really don't mean anything, as long as we understand what we're talking about. I didn't want complete nutrition, parenteral nutrition, because that implied that maybe it couldn't get any better. Complete is a little bit different from total. Total meant entirely by, complete meant. Well, at any rate, I wrote an article that's in the Japanese literature, and because of your question and many others, I'm going to ask them if I can reprint that article. Matter of fact, I'll ask Mary, maybe she can get me some help from JPEN. I'd like to reprint or revise that article because I told the story of from hyperalimentation to TPN. And I think it might, and it's all, but when they printed it, I gave it to them in English, but they printed it in Japanese. And for the 30th anniversary of
You need
J-Spin,
reverse-
the Japanese parental
reverse
nutrition.
translation.
And I will, but I'd like to do it in English, because I'm getting a lot of questions about it. And at least it'll be someplace where I can say, if you wanna know about it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.